We'd like to call to order the March 23rd, 2026 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that all board members are present, and we have one of our student reps, James, and we've got another one, Suniri, is on her way. We have one topic on the agenda tonight, which is the sustainability plan. Dr. Holman.
Yes, so tonight is really the next step in our journey as a school district, as an organization, as a board. The board, as you know, adopted policy OE9 related to sustainability, which really did kind of launch the formalization of how we wanted to think about and address issues related to sustainability, resource conservation management. It also helped us look inwardly to know, like, what's the work that's going on internally? How do we tell that story? And then what are the areas for us to improve as a school district? And so tonight really is an opportunity for the team to share about the work related to the development of a plan and really the next steps regarding a roadmap, because a plan without a plan for implementation isn't going to get done. And so that's really an important aspect to this as well. So I'll hand it over to Deputy Superintendent Gillingham to introduce the team and orient us to our presentation tonight.
All right, thank you, Dr. Holman. Joined tonight by Hannah Jungren, our Associate Director of Sustainability and Resource Conservation, Karen Goldmark, who is the President and Founder of GreenLink, and Brian Buck, our Executive Director of Support Services. I get the pleasure of kind of kicking this off today. We're going to start with your policy. Operational Expectation 9, the board adopted a couple of years ago, and it really kind of articulated a set of commitments or values that the board has and the ways that the district should operate. As the board over the last decade has really been working to clarify its values through its policies, the values laid out here are pretty clear. For that we're charged with reducing or mitigating the impact that we have on our operations. Thinking about how changes in climate and the environment impact our ability to operate and function as both as a school district and as part of a broader community. And one of the things that I really appreciated as the board went through the process of listening to our students and community and thinking about developing this policy is really also kind of grounding that our mission first and foremost is educating children and preparing them to be citizens in a world that is dynamic and challenging. And so this commitment to thinking about what does that mean to prepare students for a future where they can understand the relationships that we have with our environment, and then conversely, what does it take to support our staff so that they can do that? And what's not in this policy explicitly, but really what I think undergirds that, particularly that the third item there, is hope. We heard when the board went through this policy of how important it was for us in our role to establish a leadership position so that our younger generations have hope, that they see a future that is possible. And so today kind of marks, the next step in really communicating and kind of crystallizing what that future can look like. So, and it is a next step. We're actually going to start in our presentation actually looking back at what some of the work that the district has done to this date. Not to necessarily pat ourselves on the back, although I think there's areas in which we could, but to recognize where we're launching off from is actually in many ways a position of strength. And that is allowing us to do things or look at things in ways that gets more complicated, but is also pretty exciting. So with that, and we've talked a lot at the board about how does the board's policies lead and get integrated into the work that we do. And so this year we launched the strategic framework, and that the strategic framework really recognizes kind of a distributed leadership model where we're articulating first our values and commitments. And so you can see that sustainability and stewardship is listed as an organizational value. And integrated sustainability is one of our 4 commitments that we've made as an organization. And so that's carried through in the way that we talk with our leadership team and with our staff and with our students and families. And so we're going to kind of jump in here. I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Buck, who will talk about some of the work we've done up to this point.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, our district has been nationally recognized for our sustainability leadership. In 2019, we received the Department of Education's Green Ribbon Award for the district. We are an 8-time award winner by King County for Best Workplace for Waste Prevention. We've received Excellence in IPM and STAR certification by the IPM Institute of North America. In 2017, we received a Green Cleaning Award from American School and University Magazine. McKinstry awarded us a Champions of Sustainability in 2015. And we've received many grants and rebates related to our conservation efforts. Most recently, we received over $50,000 from Puget Sound Energy for our energy performance within the last year. So we're dedicated to sustainability. Since 2006, we've saved in operations costs about $24.1 million. The district has the largest solar capacity of any school district in the state of Washington. Currently now we have solar at 18 sites, totaling 665 kilowatts. That includes the opening of Rockwell Elementary. So most recently, Redmond Middle School and Inglewood Middle School, there are solar panels on the bathrooms at the fields. Additionally, our new construction has traditionally performed about 20% better than what's required by the Energy Code. And as it relates to irrigation water, domestic water reductions, we've replaced all of our older toilets and restroom sinks with low flow and high efficiency aerators. Native landscaping has saved about $500,000 a year in irrigation water. And we've done really well at reducing our solid waste costs. This year, we added sensors into our solid waste dumpsters so we can monitor activity. And while we have implemented recycling and compost collection infrastructure throughout our schools and buildings, the challenge going forward really is to increase our overall waste diversion rates through integrated consistency throughout our operations. So our construction standards have a standard for geothermal loops when we're able to have geothermal. Otherwise, we prioritize efficient electric heat pump systems. Solar panels are now on all new construction, including solar ready for future expansion of solar panels. We have ceiling fans in multi-story buildings and large common spaces. We have high efficiency lighting, including in some cases solar tubes. All of our appliances are Energy Star are rated, and our building automation systems have smart features that allow us to control our systems remotely, and it automates for efficiency. And the newest right there, electric vehicle charging stations are now standard at all new construction. Rockwell will be the first with electrical vehicle charging stations. And like I mentioned, we have new solar panels on Inglewood, Redmond Middle, and soon at Rockwell. So our transportation fleet is fairly new. The average age of our fleet is 7.5 years old. We've received grants. In 2018, we received a $560,000 grant for low emissions buses. Since then, we've purchased 59 new buses that are low emission buses, and most recently have received over $1.7 million for electric buses and the infrastructure for the 4 buses we deployed in 2025. And then in addition, annually, our drivers receive training related to idling and avoiding idling. And furthermore, our systems can track if our buses are idling. Okay, I'll hand it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Brian. Well, as a district, we have a lot of accomplishments thus far, but we wouldn't be here, obviously, without our students, and we wanted to highlight some of the awesome student engagement that we've seen over the past few years. As Brian already mentioned, we were awarded a Green Ribbon District Award from the Department of Education in 2019. This last recorded year of 2024 to 2025 school year, we had 40 schools participating in the King County Green Schools, which is well above the average, which is very exciting. And then there's too many green team programs, policies, and initiatives to count, so we just highlighted a few here. We have several schools that are utilizing food shares as well as donations. We have walk and bike school programs that have been initiated by green teams. There are numerous students who reach out on probably a weekly basis to gather district data so that they can create their own programs and initiatives at their classrooms and green teams. There is reusable service pilot programs going on at several schools as well, and we have seen record-breaking engagement in our Sustainability Advisory Committee from our students, and every meeting there's new faces, which is very exciting. Now, shifting away from some of our past achievements and moving on to the future, I wanted to introduce Karen, as Matt already mentioned, who is one of our consultants from GreenLink. GreenLink was selected to help us in the creation of our sustainability plan and roadmap, primarily because of their extensive background working with school districts. So I'm going to pass it over to Karen.
Thank you, Hannah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Goldmark. I'm one of the 2 founders of GreenLink Education. Along with Anthony de Guzman, my business partner, and we founded GreenLink Education specifically to work with school districts. We both have a background in school districts, both on the program side and the operational side. I was a deputy chancellor, which is the equivalent of a deputy superintendent in New York City, and Anthony was the COO of DC Public Schools. And we each had huge teams working on these issues, and then we found that in most school districts across America, there is one person working on sustainability, and that's on a good day. Many school districts have 0 people working on sustainability. And so we started GreenLink really specifically to bring the technical expertise that can go really deep on these issues to school districts across the country. And very early on in our experience as a company, we came across an RFP from a wonderful school district in the state of Washington called the Lake Washington School District, and this was actually prior to the sustainability plan. This was for the food FSSR. I no longer remember what it stands for, and this was to help with composting and food waste reduction. And so we applied for that RFP and won it, and that is really the source of how we came to know Lake Washington School District. Later, when the school district then did another RFP for this sustainability plan, we competed for that too. And this project has 2 components. One is the plan that we're talking about today at a high level, and the other is a roadmap to translate the plan into actionable next steps. Today, we're really focusing on the plan. The plan is structured around OE9. I'll talk about that in a minute. And has been a little over a year in the making. The original schedule had us completing this in December, so we're a little bit past that, but essentially when we had to make a decision about more engagement or more speed, we really always went with engagement. So there's been a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement. We've met with the Sustainability Advisory Committee just about every month. Since starting, we've met with the district's leadership team several times. We've visited schools offices. We've met your counterparts in Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish in terms of the sustainability teams there. We looked at your energy use data. We looked at all the laws and regulations in play in Washington State, which are really, in one way, leading the nation, and in another way, placing a lot on school districts in terms of what you're required to do. There's really nothing quite like that in any other state in terms of where the regulatory framework, maybe California. And so we looked at all these components and working hand in hand with Hannah and Brian and the rest of the district team came up with a set of recommendations that have now been reviewed by multiple stakeholders and that we'll be going over at a high level this evening. And so just yes, we can jump to the next one. Thank you. Just to take one moment to talk a little bit about integrated sustainability. This is one of the topics we discussed at length with the Sustainability Advisory Committee and the leadership team is this question of what integrated sustainability means. I won't read what's on the slide, but I will say that integrated sustainability is really about meeting the present needs without compromising the future, the ability of future generations to meet their needs, and without compromising the ecosystems around us, locally as well as globally. And this is a really expansive view of what sustainability means that the school district has developed. And so embedding this notion of sustainability into not only the operational practices, but also the instructional practices and the work that everyone in the district does every day is a long-term process. It's not one day you come up with a plan and the next day sustainability is integrated across the district. It's something that you'll be doing for years to come, and this plan reflects that approach. I'll stop so that you can actually read that without my voice over having different words in it. And you'll see that this definition really touches on the major elements of the work that Lake Washington does. And we'll have perhaps more opportunity to discuss that as we move through. Now I'm going to turn to introduce the greenhouse gas inventory. This is one of the key activities we undertook as part of the development of this plan. The reason we did this is to set a baseline for the district. As you're measuring your success or challenges in reducing your environmental impact moving forward, you'll want to do that using a baseline. And the baseline year is the 2022-2023 school year. We wanted a school year that did not have COVID impacts on what your emissions were, and that had good data. So that is the year that had the most recent data that was complete and that was not a COVID year. So this inventory starts with the 2022-2023 school year, and you'll be able to use it as a benchmark moving forward. A lot of the energy savings you've already achieved are not embedded in this baseline because you've already got them. There's not really a way to go back with real fidelity to some of the years where you started your actual journey on sustainability. But 2022-2023 is a good enough baseline. And what you'll see is that, thank you, you've got room to move forward even with all that you've already achieved. But some context, these emissions numbers are quite good for a school district. I'll just briefly give a quick overview of them. And so you may already know this, but just in case, there are three kinds of emissions when we talk about greenhouse gas inventory: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 is what happens on site at your schools, your buses. It's your emissions that happen. Think of it as it's happening on the land that is controlled by the Lake Washington School District or managed by the Lake Washington School District. Scope 2 are emissions that are, it's called indirect. These are emissions from the energy that you purchase. And Scope 2 is its own category. Scope 3 are emissions from everything else that happens. So everything you purchase that's not energy, commuting that happens to and from your facilities on the part of students who aren't taking the school bus, staff, employees, families. Everything, think of it as everything you buy and everything that happens that's related to the school district. So Scope 1 happens on your on the land that you're managing. Scope 2 is you're buying it for energy, and Scope 3 is everything else. And as you can see, the Scope 1 and 2 make up the lion's share of your emissions. And I'll just say about Scope 3, we cannot find another school district that has actually even attempted to do a Scope 3 emissions. So as you'll see in a minute, it's a partial inventory. That's more than most organizations in the world even bother to do, and we can't benchmark you because you are apparently a leader in this effort to have a Scope 3 inventory at all. But the focus of today is really going to be on Scopes 1 and 2, so if we can advance. And the focus of the plan is on Scope 1 and 2. Okay, so Scope 1, as I said, are the direct emissions. That is everything on this chart that is not that fuchsia that you see with the 40.7. So emissions that happen at Lake Washington School District facilities include natural gas for your heating. That's that 41.7. The next largest one is actually transportation. It's diesel for your bus fleet. Then you can see some smaller ones. So the 2.1% is gas for your operations fleet. So not for the buses, but for other vehicles. The 3.1% is actually refrigerants, which I'll come back to in a minute. And then there's a tiny sliver at the top. Oh, thank you, Matt. That 0.06 is fertilizer. You use very little fertilizer. And so the bar doesn't even show up on the pie chart, but it is there as a tiny number. For refrigerants, I just want to note, as you move to electrify your facilities, you will actually see refrigerant use go up. So in some cases, the emissions from refrigerants are actually significant from the point of view of the gases themselves. And so as we talk about what it means to cut emissions, we should just keep in mind that refrigerants will actually go up, and then you'll have to think about how you offset those refrigerants. But they're not going away, because every time you put in a heat pump, you're going to be adding to the refrigerant emissions in your district. So as we'll discuss in a minute, this pie chart going to 0 isn't what's going to happen, but it can get to net 0. Let's go ahead and keep going. Scope 3, as I mentioned, is partial, and we are not going to spend a ton of time on it here. We'll just say the overall goal for Scope 3 is to get better and better at measuring it. So we'll be recommending that you add to your Scope 3 inventory over time. And this is really going to be the district in dialogue with its suppliers. Much of this is are things that you just really have no control over. So for example, you can see that one of the largest, that 27.62% number, is upstream natural gas emissions. So these are emissions that are involved in what it takes to extract and transport the gas that you buy. It's not what you burn on site, but it's what it takes to get that gas here. And part of the reason the district was so committed to doing this Scope 3 part is that you obviously have a longstanding focus on reducing waste. This is something that the community is really focused on. So it's useful, but we don't want you to get too hooked on it, because this is largely outside of your control and is something that over time you'll be able to talk with your partners about, but is really the main place where you can make impact is in these Scopes 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and forward. Okay. So let's talk about the plan for a moment. The plan really mirrors OE9. So there are 4 main sections with recommendations, and then a 5th, which is about moving from plan to action. But in those first 4 sections, it really is an exact mirror of OE9. So the first is about reducing and mitigating the environmental impact of operations. The second is about resiliency. The third is about preparing students for a sustainable future. And the 4th is about equipping staff. And then within each section, there's parallel structure within each section. We start with a summary of the district's current practices and your regulatory landscape, which is impressive, as I mentioned, and input you've gotten from community stakeholders. So just setting the frame within each topic of what do you have to do, what have you already done, and what has your community said is important to them. And then there's a list of recommendations. Each of them has a little chart next to it with relative impact and cost assessments, and then they're followed by an equity analysis and budget considerations. It's worth mentioning that these actions do have budget implications, and it's something that's considered throughout the plan. They are usually not action steps that you can put a specific dollar amount to at this point, and we'll get into that as we talk more about the specific recommendations and why that is. But this plan does not come with one big overall price tag because it's a multi-year, even multi-decade effort, and some of the costs will shift over time. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so in the first section of the plan, there are really two sections in reducing and mitigating operational emissions. The first is about the greenhouse gas inventory goals, and the second is about building operations. So I'm going to talk about the first piece, and then Brian's going to talk about the second piece. And so the recommendations in the plan with respect to greenhouse gas emissions are: 1, to achieve net zero direct emissions by 2050, and 2, to expand your Scope 3 inventory to include additional sources over time. So I'll talk at length about the first one. The second one should be fairly obvious, and we've talked about it already. So the first one is to achieve, sorry, let's go back up. That's right. Achieve net zero direct emissions by 2050. This means Scopes 1 and 2 emissions by 2050. As you'll recall, of your overall emissions, a big chunk actually was your Scope 2 emissions, what you do in the way of buying electricity. Your grid in Washington is, as states go, a very clean grid, and it is scheduled to get cleaner. So currently, the plan for Washington State is for the grid to be completely clean, completely fossil fuel free by 2045. So if that holds, your section of that pie chart of your Scope 2 emissions will be completely emissions free by 2045. If that doesn't hold, you'll have to make some decisions. But right now, you can rely, for now, on the grid getting cleaner for that. So that leaves your Scope 1 emissions. And when this recommendation says net zero direct emissions, what that means is reducing the emissions to the greatest extent you can, and then offsetting whatever you cannot reduce. So for example, I mentioned refrigerants. You will still have refrigerant emissions related to refrigerants in 2050. You would then offset those emissions, presumably with steps that Brian is going to talk about in just a moment. I don't want to steal any thunder here. Okay, so, and then the second one I've discussed already is obvious. So let's go ahead and talk about the second part of the operations. And
Yeah.
go ahead, thanks.
So with our transition from fossil fuels, it includes designing our future facilities for all electric operations, electrifying existing buildings by replacing our gas-fired systems as they reach their end of life, publishing a phased decarbonization plan, looking to evaluate battery and microgrid options for backup systems, and continue with the efficiency upgrades that we're already doing each year with lighting, building controls, insulation, and optimizing our HVAC operations. As we monitor and reduce our embodied carbon, we'll pilot an embodied carbon assessment on one of our near-term modernization projects. We'll adopt reduction protocols for new construction and then set a baseline with targets after the pilot. Reducing our construction and demolition waste, we will establish waste diversion baseline and then embed enhanced diversion and salvage requirements into our specs and performance evaluations. We'll adopt a 75% diversion goal for construction and demolition waste, and further incorporate circular design principles into our project planning. As we invest in solar energy, we'll expand our rooftop solar to support our decarb plan, develop potential offsite solar projects that are suitable on some of our vacant land. And let's see, included in our greenhouse gas reduction components, funding for this is not solely the responsibility of our taxpayers. Grants, rebates, partnerships, and operational efficiency all play a part. A recent example is we received a grant to replace one of our gas-fired boilers at Thoreau Elementary School, and we replaced an we replaced an old air handling unit and HVAC system on what was the old Dickinson Gymnasium, and that alone reduced electric usage by 53%.
Could I just jump in here with an observation, which is that one of the challenges in this work is that school budgets are constrained and there are incremental costs to reducing fossil fuel emissions. And it's a foundational belief of our company that schools should not bear those costs alone. So we always work to identify funding sources, grants, tax credits, which are more complicated now, and or sunsetting. But essentially, it is really important to think about how to build the broader coalition to fund the work. I mean, one very obvious example is in electric school buses, where currently the price difference is $200,000 between an internal combustion engine bus and an electric school bus. And while we hope that narrows, until it does, it's really unfair to expect schools to rob a program to pay for emissions reductions. And so this is something that requires a lot of discussion and work by the folks in this room, by the folks in this state, in this country, to really address these important questions of how do you fund these actions. And the district has done a really great job so far of leveraging that, and there is more work to do on that.
And just I'll add on that, I think, Karen, one of the benefits of having a plan that looks out to 2050 is it gives us the flexibility to think about and be able to respond or anticipate changes in the market conditions. So as the delta gets smaller, or as we get to end of life cycle, such that we're able to look at what gains can we realize now in the short term with the resources we have, given the current set of conditions we have, and be prepared to realize additional gains in the future as market conditions, regulatory conditions change, or be able to set up long-term planning such that then we're in a better position to be able to take advantage of those.
And just one more observation is, obviously capital budgets and operating budgets tend to be separated for schools and for most government entities, and there is a challenge in that sometimes you can realize operational savings with a larger capital expense. And that's something that every day, as utility rates go up and the prices of oil and gas go up, we'll see more of these cost-benefit analyses that cross those two categories.
Okay. So waste really touches every part of the school day, from purchasing to packaging to disposal and then recovery. As we transition to reusable and compostable food serviceware, it's really about adopting reusable trays and utensils, implementing reusable flatware where we can, ensuring all schools that are able to fit dishwashers have dishwashers, utilize certified compostables, and cut single-use packaging by 50%. As we strengthen and standardize our organics collection, we mentioned that it's really now about increasing our diversion rates, and it ensures our district-wide composting system is in place, that we have audits set up. We launch a composting literacy campaign, collaborate with our local haulers, and then continue using our waste disposal sensors that we have implemented this year. As we look at expanding food waste prevention, we have a practice of having student shared tables in our commons and cafeterias. The challenge we've found in the past that will continue to be a challenge is really building out and being able to scale food donation partnerships. It's been a challenge in the past because it's hard to actually find folks to come and get the shared food to pick it up. And so we had a partner originally back prior to COVID, and that really just kind of faded. So that's really the challenge with food donation, is working with local nonprofits to pilot the pickup of food donations. Water efficiency and sustainable water use. Continue to upgrade our fixtures and irrigation systems with high efficiency models. Integrate our native and drought tolerant landscaping, and integrate stormwater and water literacy. And for transportation, we're looking at developing a 5-year plan to electrify the district's maintenance fleet, conducting a review of newly acquired operations facility across the street as a primary charging hub for future EV buses, and pilot electric grounds equipment, and expand that adoption as performance improves. We'll develop a phase in 3 to 5 years, a strategy to transition from combustion to electric buses, design all new EV charging infrastructure to be bus compatible and scalable, continue pursuing funding opportunities for the school bus fleet, and assessing electrical capacity in our operations, and installing chargers for our operations fleet.
I think I'm doing this one,
Yep.
yes. Okay, so for purchasing and upstream emissions, there are some tools that exist where you can evaluate products and vendors, and that might, sometimes there are real differences one product to another. So some tools like Green Seal is one example. Starting to use those in your purchasing is one recommendation. Another is to start piloting some low carbon procurement strategies in a few priority categories. So this is a starting approach as opposed to trying to bite off everything at once, because this Scope 3, as we've already mentioned, is kind of an endless project. So looking at some high impact volume categories, one obvious example would be in electronics. And so this third recommendation of really deepening the electronics take back and reuse strategy, where the district has already done some work. And you can do this with recyclers or with the entities from whom you're purchasing the technology. That's something that you'll just want to look at if it's cheaper to work directly with the recycler or to put it into your purchasing contracts. And also thinking about redistributing usable tech before disposal. So this is, there are a number of efforts you can take on the tech end, and it's not the only thing, it's just one of the largest categories of emissions when you're looking at your purchasing. And so it's a place to put some focus. And as we all know, it's a place where, done badly, the recycling of tech can actually be quite damaging to communities that take on that work. So back to that global ecosystem approach, this is one where the downstream effects can be quite serious. Okay. So for enhancing resilience. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So microphone on, that'll help. So the next part of this plan gets into areas addressed by the second part of OE9, which is really thinking about how do we operate in an environment that that has shifted. A decade ago, we didn't talk about smoke. We didn't have to have a plan for smoke. Our schools, we didn't have to worry about heat because it never got above 90 degrees in Seattle, and we were always in the summer anyway. And so thinking about kind of the impact of more frequent and severe weather. Shifts in the climate. So we'll be doing kind of an assessment that looks at the risks to our buildings and communities, thinking about how we build resilience, so everything from kind of uptime for power, thinking about how our infrastructure is kind of laid out so that we have resiliency and are able to operate as best as we can when there's threats to our continuity of operations. And then also thinking about the role that our schools and the district play as part of community resilience. And so looking at that, and then looking at, and I know we heard a lot, there was a keen interest in thinking about how do our sites also play a role in their local ecosystems. And so when they have opportunity to either support restoration or the resilience of those communities, Brian already talked about how the use of native planting has actually both reduced our water usage, but I imagine that there's quite a few other benefits to our communities by using native plantings on our facilities. So this will be, the plan kind of calls out areas of work that we'll need to be undertaking as a district to meet this expectation. All right, Hannah?
All right. Now, reflecting back on our OE9, we know that we are really focusing on making sure that we are preparing our students for a future that is connecting with the environment. So these next set of recommendations really reflect that. Here you can see that we have 4 main recommendations. I won't go through all of the sub-recommendations. I'll just highlight a few, but it's also important to note that since we're going to be talking about preparing students for this future, OSPI did recently refresh its standards in math and science and is more into those standards for next year, which is really exciting. Now back to our recommendations. The first one that we have is integrating sustainability into everyday learning. We can see this in a plethora of ways. One of them is developing a district-wide sustainability in learning framework over the next 3 years. So making sure that these tips and policies are accessible and easy for everyone to understand. Also making sure that we are integrating tribal nations and community knowledge into the curriculum. Identifying current standards and curricula that either already include sustainability education or with minor adoptions can include sustainability education. 2, deepening and expanding our outdoor learning experiences for all Lake Washington students. So that can include a lot of different plethoras as well. Things like building outdoor learning labs at each elementary school and maybe middle schools in the future as well. Partnering with organizations like OutTeach for outdoor education content. We're already seeing that at schools like Mirren Elementary. Number 3, expanding and developing additional green career pathways for high school students. So perhaps that could be reflected as adding a LEED Green Associate Certification program to go beyond or pair with environmental AP Science classes. Also making sure that we are supporting college and career centers to guide students towards sustainability and expanded internship opportunities. 4, launching a student green fund to support school-led innovation. As we touched on a little bit earlier, there's a lot of really exciting ideas that our students have, and being able to have some sort of fund like this that could potentially support these programs and provide them with financial support that they might not be able to get otherwise is something that was recommended. Now, our next one also reflects back to one of our OE9 commitments, and it was highlighted obviously in the development of that, but also a lot in our community engagement, how important supporting our staff is and that it needs to be made a priority. So that is why we have this section here as recommendations, and it's really moving away from letting things just happen to making them happen. So here you can see there is a lot of different recommendations. So again, I won't touch on all of the subcategories. I will just highlight a few. Our first is developing a community-wide alignment on sustainability through shared language and experience. You already got to see a little bit of that in action earlier on in the presentation with an adopting of a shared definition of integrated sustainability that Karen spoke on. You can also see it as creating sustainability volunteer programs for parents and community partners to support student learning. We already have a really engaged community and parents, so being able to create a more formalized approach for that. Our second, expanding training for operational staff. So this can be reflected as something such as integrating sustainability expectations into evaluations and providing role-specific training. If you've worked with some of our schools, there's often the conversation of where are these new tasks, where are these new requirements going to fall, who's going to be in charge of managing them, and making sure that we have those expectations really clearly laid out, as well as the necessary training is really important. Number 3, support school and district administrative staff in advancing sustainability. This could look like regular site visits to provide guidance, so myself or Brian or someone else designated going out, working directly with the custodial staff, making sure that there's no liners and bins for the FSSR, for example, and really just more hands-on experience so everyone is being held accountable. Number 4, supporting teachers in integrated sustainability. Some examples of this is creating a shared Teams space, so Teams, Microsoft Teams, or something similar for educators to exchange sustainability lessons and project ideas. So every time someone is wanting to do something, they're not having to recreate the wheel and they can learn from each other. Promoting professional learning through partnerships like Sustainability Ambassadors, and WABS is another great opportunity. Again, not recreating the wheel, to use that turn of phrase again. There's a lot of really great resources out there, and being able to connect the staff with those already created programs is something that we're looking into. Number 5, strengthening support systems for green team leaders. So this can look like standardizing when necessary, expectations and perhaps stipends to ensure equitable support across schools. Number 6, establish an internal sustainability implementation team to support and augment sustainability management capacity. So this could look like forming a cross-departmental working group to support myself in this work, as well as any of our sustainability action plan and roadmap implementation goals. And then number 7, investing in internal communications and recognition. I'm sure you've all experienced where you hear about a program, or maybe you don't hear about a program until it's already over, that you had no idea existed. So really designating clear points of contacts for schools to seek support and guidance, really highlighting the work that's already going on, and just making sure that we have clear guidelines on that. Now, going on to next steps. So here you can see a couple different aspects of our next steps. So as we highlighted, the sustainability plan is our long-term vision, and these next steps are helping us to kind of shift into more deliverable timelines, and kind of moving from planning to action, so to speak. So our first is transition to implementation. This is exactly what I just said, essentially, of creating a of helping create more of a timeline where we are really starting to see this implemented. And the way that you're going to see that timeline is through our sustainability roadmap. Our roadmap is currently being completed, but it is essentially expectations, evaluations, things like that, all with very specific dates and times. And then we have our recommended mechanisms to monitor progress. Here you can see quite a few different subsections, and it's important to highlight that these are all listed in the frequency of their order, so how often those check-ins would go on. For example, we have our continued engagement with our Sustainability Advisory Committee. That's the advisory committee I touched on a little bit earlier, that's made up of staff, community members, and students. So we'd want to continue engaging with them in a variety of different ways, having those ongoing conversations and exploring what role they could provide in the future. The next is the public performance data. This essentially is making sure that our data and resources are accessible to the public, having full transparency and engagement, continuing to update our greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. Our next is scheduled progress reports, so publishing annual sustainability summaries detailed in our roadmap, so making sure that our outcomes are measurable and deliverable and we are reaching for those. Next is board updates, so providing regular updates to the school board, aligning with our OE9 expectations, ensuring, again, that accountability, visibility, and that we are reaching those goals that we've outlined. And then the last one that we have outlined here is just plan and roadmap updates. Currently, we are planning on reviewing and updating the plan and roadmap every 5 years. So this way we can see if we are on track, if deliverables need to be adjusted, and what needs to be changed if we are not on track.
All right, so that was quite a bit of content and a very, yeah, so probably an opportunity for questions from the board.
Director Richter?
Sure, I'll take the first one on this one. I did want to say that got a little bit of chills just seeing the words on screen of net zero by 2050. Just a soapbox for a very brief few moments. That means a lot to a lot of people in the district that have been really pushing for this for a while. So that was exciting to see. So I kind of wanted to call that out.
Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
We didn't land on that arbitrarily nor without significant conversation, because one of the things that, when that was originally brought forward, we didn't want it to just be a performative, pat ourselves on the back and not actually ever take any action to accomplish that. And so it was, I would say, a very thorough conversation. I think multiple conversations to actually come to an agreement that that was something that we believed was responsibly put into the plan, because I think our community deserves an honest appraisal of what we're committing to. And so and is it a lofty goal? Absolutely. Will it take significant partnerships and work and legislative advocacy and our legislature not taking steps backwards on us in this work? Yes. But it's something that I truly believe we can take actionable steps towards and, given current conditions, accomplish. And so I appreciate you calling that out, because that wasn't just let's put it in there because it's a nice thing to talk about, but it's actually something that we are going to actively be working towards.
The other part of my thought was it's an easy thing to say and it's a harder thing to do, so I appreciate you just getting in there and getting that in first. You said it better than I ever could, and I love the fact there was thought that went into it to that degree. I think the actual question, which probably is less for the board and more for any of the listening public, would just be the actually doing it as the timeline, and if there was any comment for others on when that would be seen.
Could
the timeline,
you clarify
like
when
the
roadmap?
That's going to come out. Yeah, the roadmap.
Yeah. Okay.
Not exactly quite sure what to say about the timeline. I can say that one of the things that started to happen as we got into the later drafts of the plan is that it became almost necessary to start creating the roadmap at the same time, because there were implications of those decisions. So there is a draft roadmap that needs some work. Again, I don't want to step on Hannah or Brian's toes in terms of process and timeline, but it's pretty soon, I would say.
No, you phrased it very well. There's a draft form. We're hoping to get a little bit more feedback on any adjustments or tweaks that need to be made before it's finalized. So we're just waiting on that currently.
And I would say, I think with the roadmap too requires there's a level of vetting that is in terms of, because when we're looking at our strategies for 2050, you can see sequencing things in different order, and where now it's like, okay, so there's the near-term assessment of the organizational capacity, the funding resources and streams that we're able to tap into in the near term, or thinking about, okay, what should we be doing now to be able to be in an opportunity to take advantage of or set up additional funding or resource streams in the future. So in many ways, like at this point, while, yes, those conversations have been happening, yeah, the roadmap is where, where it really starts to get real, because those commitments are actually starting to say, well, this is the actions that we're going to be doing over the course of the next 1 to 5 years, so.
And there are a number of recommendations that don't start for 3 years, because one of the big pressures in drafting the roadmap was it looked like between now and the end of the next school year, you were going to have to do 152 things. And so it just, some of the things have to move out. And so it was actually a good forcing mechanism to say, well, to hit that 2050 goal, actually the building decarbonization that work has to start, a roadmap for that. And the Student Green Fund, which is fantastic, you really have to wait 3 years to start that because you're going to be doing too much. So there are trade-offs in that roadmap.
Director Liberty?
Great. Perfect segue to my question. So we have this plan now that matches OE9 in terms of, the plan hits each element and it talks about here's how we take steps towards getting towards this sort of aspirational OE that we have in place. And then there'll be a roadmap with sort of concrete steps. So my question I'm getting to is for Dr. Holman, which is when we monitor OE9 going forward, with the indicators of compliance and how we go about thinking, monitoring OE9, how are you envisioning the interplay between this work that's going on here and then how the board will monitor OE9? Good luck.
We've taken a bit of a deviation from the standard coherent governance process for operational expectation monitoring. And what we've chosen to do is, and I say we because it really was a collaboration with between board and superintendent, we've taken the approach that we aspire to more than just basic compliance. And that if we aspire to more than basic compliance, then we're going to accomplish greater things. Like that's, as I think about our OE monitoring and what we're attempting to do with the board's policies and that work. And so I think we're going to have to not be creative, but we're going to have to be thoughtful around what does progress look like in monitoring an area that is, obviously we're adopting a plan in March of 2026 that talks about 2050. Right. That's a very different kind of plan than we typically adopt. And so we're just going to have to be thoughtful. I would say probably doing some bit of review of the interpretation and indicators would be important. And then if I believe there's misalignment with kind of where we are given the plan, to bring that back to the board for discussion and review.
I might add something on that. While the plan calls out some very specific actions, it also, and as we think about in the context of operational expectations, it's how is the organization going to behave? And so, as Karen, I believe you were talking about, like purchasing, for example, right? There's a paradigm or some behaviors that, as an organization, that we're saying, hey, if we incorporate these behaviors into that element of how we do business, it's going to support our ability to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from Scope 2. And so that might be a way too, that's kind of consistent with the way the board monitors operational expectations, is what are the behaviors of the organization consistent with the values. Having a plan, there's deliverables that we can certainly point to, but there's also ways in which that as we go through this and we've been doing this in our support services for a long time and thinking about how do we kind of realize certain efficiencies, and the level of sophistication that Brian's proposing, right, is kind of ratcheting up. But essentially it's just saying, hey, we're adding these to the paradigm or the way in which that we do our work. So that could be potentially a way that we, as we get into this more, can get a little bit more crystal clear. We're calling out, we're doing these behaviors, they're in alignment with the plan, and that's in alignment with the values that the board has articulated in its policy.
Director Meekoff.
And I think I heard something about the roadmap kind of being, was it reevaluated every 5 years or?
So what we recommend is actually updating the plan every 5 years. The roadmap, you're going to probably review it more frequently because it has, so the way the roadmap is laid out, it has a fair amount of detail for the first 5 years, including the year that for starting each of the hundreds of items that are in the plan. And then at the 5-year mark, it turns into decades, right? So we really didn't put much in 2040 to 2050 because it's impossible to say now what exactly the tasks will be at that point. So every 5 years, refresh the whole plan. And then the roadmap, you can refresh it annually for sure, and possibly more often for some of the sub.
Okay. Yeah, that was the way that I was thinking about it, is not looking at 2050 necessarily, but looking in the shorter term, how are we going to get to 2050 with the choices that we're making? And
Karen, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how we kind of will look at that. I mean, there's a couple of things maybe that, as I've heard you talk about this, that, one, it's assessing what we were able to do or not do kind of in that time period, and then making decisions based on kind of a shifting landscape, whether it's regulatory, financial, the market conditions. So things like, the cost benefit analysis of solar or yellow school buses right now looks one way that might say, okay, we're only doing this much there, but then in 5 years, so if you can talk about like the decision points that we'll then reflect on when we go to review that plan.
Yeah, so there are a couple of key factors, right? One is let me do it a different way. From here forward, you're constantly making decisions that will have long-term impact, right? Every day you're going to be making building level decisions, and your capital plan, has 30, 40-year impact on what you do. So you have big moments to make decisions, but you take time to run up to those decisions. So right now you've got a plan that's running through 2031, I think. And so the key work there is, what does the plan after 2031 look like? So this may be a kind of circular way to get to your answering this question, but basically you want to think about a building decarbonization plan is the very next step to start mapping out what are the systems that are going to reach their end of life in the next 10 years. You can't always predict what year that's going to happen, as Brian well knows, but generally, when do we think that's going to happen? Because when you buy an emergency boiler, you're buying a gas boiler, but if you know sometime in the next 2 years, this one is going to reach its end of life, and so what are we going to do? You can start planning for it, right? So those kinds, you want that map to be quite detailed. Then you have all of the variables around cost. So solar is a never-ending example of how the incentives change. Literally, there have been changes to the actual incentives at the federal level, but what I really mean is when your utility rates go up, solar gets more compelling. So this year, nationally, there's been a 12% rise in utility rates, which is generally not a great thing. However, it does make solar much more appealing for many more potential users of solar. And so there's a point at which solar just becomes worth it because of what you're paying for electricity. And so you want to, that's the kind of number you just want to watch every year and say, is this now something that's worth investing in because it pays for itself? Buses will have to be a massive shift for that to be just worth it on its own. So that's, these cost-benefit questions, you have to keep making them because the conditions keep changing. I literally, 10 minutes before this meeting, saw for the very first time a cost-benefit analysis showing a backup battery being better than a backup propane system. I have never actually seen an analysis showing this before, and so I was sort of confused, and we were going over it, and we're going to go over it at more length. So that's just an example of the technologies are changing so quickly. Battery costs are coming down. So the direction of how this is going to work is in your favor with the goal. But you will have to work on those equations kind of real time, because this may be the first year that backup battery is cheaper than propane, literally. And the buses are nowhere near, right? And so part of what this plan says is essentially the recommendations were keyed to what's actually close to being market ready, what's something that will have such a long downstream impact that you should make the investment now of figuring that out, like you're in your buildings, and what are things that you should wait for the market to catch up to you. And so to be really explicit, that's why we did not make a recommendation around electrifying your bus fleet right now, today, do it all, because that'd be great for cutting emissions and it would be unbelievably expensive. So, so this plan essentially is key to that as things stand in 2025, 2026. So that's why every year you're going to want to look and see, has something changed in the market? Is that getting to the question?
Okay. James.
So I can't remember the exact percentage, but looking at the pie chart on scope 2, okay, well, we're all the way back. So if we're relying so much on changes from PSE or Puget Sound Energy, or like changes from a state level or out of our control, are we just going to wait for them to create these changes? Because I know Washington has committed to being like net zero by 2050. So if they don't reach that goal, do we also not reach that goal too? Like, are we waiting for them?
So we talked about this at some length. I'm glad you raised it because it's a really important question, because to your point, the scope 2 is currently 25% of your emissions as a district. So let's say that something happens and no further progress is made on the extent to which the grid is clean in Washington State. I can't remember right now the backup numbers on the grid itself, but that would basically mean that half of that 25% are going to be fossil fuel emissions now. So what we lightly recommend is that you watch this, and if it gets to the point where you can tell that your scope 2 emissions are going to get in the way of you getting your goal, that's when you would, as a community, really decide, actually, we're going to offset all of those emissions. Or we're going to just go to the state legislature and knock on the door and say, don't relax these rules, you've got to invest more, whatever it is. I could go on all day about the ways school districts can be compelling in that debate, because school districts have, Matt has heard this, and Brian, everyone's heard this, there are some really compelling energy attributes to school districts that can make you really strong in that fight, in that when school's out in the summer, that's when peak energy demand happens. And so one of the things you could advocate for is a net metering system for schools that would essentially incentivize every school in the state to invest in renewable energy, because they'd get paid for it in the summer when school's out, and then no one else gets to get off the hook for not cleaning up their fossil fuels, because you're essentially doing that. That's a little bit of a rabbit hole, and we won't go into it here, but this is the kind of thing where 10 years from now, you're going to have some decisions as a community, or the grid's going to be getting cleaner and cleaner because the regulations are in place. And that, again, we can't predict which way that's going to go now.
And then, this is a little bit off topic, and I don't know if we can really look at this, but when, like, you brought up the example of using a backup battery instead of a backup propane tank, have we looked at, like, when that battery is at its end of life, how are we recycling that? Because I've like seen a lot of articles about lithium, like harvesting lithium is not that sustainable, or like it's not that eco-friendly, and then also at the end of life it's not that eco-friendly either. So have we looked at both those things?
So that's a great example of an industry that is very nascent. So there are a lot of startups thinking about how can we harvest all of these batteries. And school buses are a great example, actually, because those are huge batteries. So when those buses have been running a while and they actually don't have great range for a bus, they will actually still have plenty of battery capacity. So there are a couple of options that the district could think about. One is you could think about that in your long-term plan. You can say eventually the buses are going to be backup power for the buildings, and we'll actually take the batteries out and we'll connect them to the buildings. And so we're actually not going to invest in backup battery power now, because eventually our buses will do that 10 years from now when we've run them around a lot. That's an example of a long-term decision. Mostly, battery recycling is going to be a market answer, and you're going to, just like you're going to find the electronics recyclers, the battery recyclers will probably find you in the case of a school district, and you'll be able to essentially sell old battery for parts. But there's a lot. Every time I go to a clean tech pitch night, 3 of the companies are working on battery recycling.
Director Richter?
What was my question? Oh my God. Yes. Somewhere in there, actually, restart. I appreciated the way the presentation started today with saying this is where we're at. We're really proud of where we're at. We can be proud of that, but also realize how far we have to go. But then I also was fascinated by Karen, you said that we're doing quite well for a school district. And I was curious about that statement and wondered if you could elaborate a little bit.
At the risk of talking about the sector I've spent my entire professional career in, honestly, so when we essentially met through this first RFP for the FSSR, and as we got to know the district, it's been such a pleasure to work with you. I know that expectations are high in the Pacific Northwest, and I am glad that is so, and I wish they were this way everywhere. This is, okay, so a nicer way to put it is climate action feels very optional for the vast majority of school districts in America. Given all of the challenges that schools face on a regular day, it's fair for school districts to say, I will get to that tomorrow, and it is understandable when they don't. I experienced this myself in school districts. I did not work on climate as much as I knew we should in the capital plans that I developed. So again, I'm not, as the young people, I don't know if they still say this, might say no shade. Okay. However, it's really a sector that, as a result of a lot of deferred maintenance in most school districts, as a result of underfunding, and as a result of competing priorities, the sector as a whole is lagging behind many other sectors. Not all. Schools are definitely ahead of the oil and gas industry. But so that's, when I say for a school district, it's in the context of that. There's 13-14% of school districts in America have any solar at all. So it's really, there's not quite enough happening in school districts. That said, there's work happening here that everyone should know about. So it really is, that first part of that presentation is really true. The school district has done a tremendous amount, and it's very heartening to see.
Director Yoakum.
Thanks. I'm just sitting here in awe and just want to say thank you so much for putting this together, everyone who's been involved. It was really nice this past week to just or weekend to sit down and read through the plan. It was just very exciting because it's something that we've been anticipating and waiting for, and it was enjoyable. I also just really appreciate you acknowledging, I'm trying to go back to my notes where you're saying you are leading the nation here in the state and placing a lot on school districts. So acknowledging that, I really appreciate that you said that. I do have a really simple question. Well, I don't know if it's simple, but when talking with the surrounding municipalities, do they do Scope 3 inventory?
So I can't speak to the municipalities. And I don't want to say that there is not a school district that has done it. What I can say is that we looked pretty hard for a school district that had done a Scope 3 inventory, including some of the well-knowns that maybe I shouldn't name in case they have, but we spent a lot of time with the Denver plan. We spent a fair amount with the Salt Lake City plan. We spent, we looked at all of the surrounding school district plans. Now, very few organizations to begin with do Scope 3. Scope 3 is complicated. It's easy to say that is actually someone else's problem, because you could say it's Crayola's job to make sure that they take care of Crayola's emissions. But the problem with Scope 3 is that everyone can pass it off on someone else, and so it's that sort of taking responsibility for the full set of, what you do or do in partnership with others. But we have not found a Scope 3 inventory. Again, somebody might email tomorrow or right during the middle of this meeting and say that they did one, but we looked and we didn't find one. And we have research assistants, we have people looking. It wasn't just me and the internet.
And I can understand that, right? Passing it off as somebody else's problem, but I think highlighting those others' problems really makes our community look inwards, I think, and say, okay, how are we also part of this? So I do appreciate that it is in there and that this district has decided to try it best to inventory that.
One of the things when I think about this and why we engage this work and doing this is thinking about, I've worked in this district for 15 some years, and I haven't seen an issue that's animated our students to the same degree as this one. We constantly are getting emailed by students. We've had students stay engaged in the Sustainability Advisory Committee. Usually we get students, there's a kind of this initial interest in committees and then it wanes. It has grown through that. And so again, kind of coming back to that notion of hope, this level of kind of transparency, doing this work is hard. I actually, John, said like we didn't take that reasonably. I'm daunted by what, it's kind of like, okay, what do we just sign up for? So many of our students are, I think James, like the question you just asked, right? The level of sophistication, the interest, the importance. And so if nothing else, not passing up that buck and saying, okay, what do we have? Really also aligns with kind of that locus of control that I think we want all of our students to also be able to say is, we can't solve this. Dr. Holman was saying this today, right? It's like, we could do all of this and it's like a drop in the bucket. But if we do all of this in visibility of a community that's highly motivated, that is able to continue to push each other and push others, if we do it with the brilliant students that we have that are coming up with amazing ideas, and I think about that are wanting to go and study and solve these problems, that's the downside. Don't really get a measure, but by doing this work, hopefully we're setting that example, and so I'm really excited about the work and the plan that this team and everybody that's contributed to it has developed, because that commitment, I think, goes beyond just reducing our environmental impact. It goes to, hopefully I think that our students will see this and say, what can we do? What's within our sphere of influence, our locus of control? Because we know that it's going to take all of us to do something to be able to make an impact.
One thing I wanted to call out just real quick, and sort of following on from students, for the outdoor learning piece, as the parent of a fifth grader, I would love to see something in there around fifth grade camp, which is, I had the opportunity to chaperone that this year, and the connections to sustainability to a lot of what we're talking about here are really were very tangible. And it's, I think there's been some changes sort of in the funding structure. So it is expensive, and making sure that our students, maybe not as a top priority, but as, I just wanted to call that out as an experience that is sort of a tradition in Washington State, really outside of Lake Washington, and that I think is in some, just could get lost in the shuffle of everything else we're doing.
Yeah, and I think the plan doesn't get that specific, but it looks at how are we creating opportunities for students, whether those are kind of the episodic, kind of experiential learning, or whether that's, kind of the regular basis. Karen, you actually spoke today a little bit about some of the research for students.
Yeah, so, I'm not opining about programmatic decisions of the instructional team here. What I will say is that there's more and more research about the benefits of time in nature for student learning, for student health, for all of us and our health and mental health. And so far, the research is really about the benefits of that regular, everyday time. So the mental health effects are really solid for the everyday time. And so the kind of, I am, again, not minimizing the value of camping outside. I personally love it. But the research shows that kind of if you spend a week in the woods, you'll be happy that week. And if you spend an hour outside every day, that will help you with your life on an ongoing basis. And so as you're thinking about the moves on outdoor learning, it's really important to think about that every day, outside learning, nature as the classroom. How is that really integrated into the learning that goes on every day? Because it's actually easier to do a week-long trip than it is to really integrate that learning, but the effects are stronger for the latter.
So one thing I'd like to add is I like totally agree on, as a school district, I think we're like primed in this position where we can teach young kids about this major issue, which is getting worse and worse, even though we're creating all these plans for 2050 net zero. It's like global warming still getting worse, climate change still getting worse. So I think that's great. And I also agree with wanting to like fund, I know my school, like Washington High School, has a really great green team, and we've done a lot at a school level to try and, you know, be more sustainable. Like we use metal forks, spoons, and knives now in the cafeteria, and we actually have compost. But I also think, like, for example, a lot of students still don't know what should be recycled, what should be trash, what should be compost. That's something small that I think if everybody could differentiate that, maybe we'd, you know, see more benefits of composting. Because I've seen some people throw composting, like, containers, I guess, in the trash. And I think that goes back to, like, educating students, which we as a school district can do, unlike Crayola probably can't really do that.
Absolutely. If I can join you in a little soapbox speech here, absolutely. So in schools, we're building habits all day long, every day, right? And so either we're building habits that are pro-sustainability, or we are building habits that are not. So, and this is one of the things that international travel can teach you in 5 minutes, right? Is in many other countries, everyone knows how to recycle properly. And it seems to be something that in the United States we have a very hard time teaching and learning, and actually that makes no sense. And some of it is that in places where recycling is really well established, it is actually uniform across the entire country. So wherever you go, you know what you're supposed to do with all your stuff. And of course in the US, you can cross literally a town line, right? Even in the school district, when we were working on the FSSR, the signage is a little bit different in Kirkland and in Redmond, and it's confusing. And so it's not that it's not understandable how these challenges come to be, but really schools are the place to do this, because otherwise every other part of society is actually fighting against whatever is happening in the school if the school isn't teaching it. So to put it more positively, as you're saying, schools are building lifelong habits, and so this is the place for people to learn to recycle. And it's really, really important. And it's not currently in the kind of core mission of anybody's job in a school, right? So that's one of the things that in this theme of integrated sustainability is really powerful, because it then calls that question of, well, everyone needs to think about this, and so who's going to think about the cafeteria, for example? And you do have some really good infrastructure in a lot of places in the school district to build on, and even here, there are plenty of students who do not know which bin to put things in. Yeah.
Suneri.
I have a question surrounding like specifically the high school student experience, and I think that's just because like the student reps recently did a lot of work with the high school student experience. I noticed one thing you said in the presentation was about like at the high school level working with maybe like AP environmental science classes to do things, but one thing that's just like a thinking point for me, and also I know like maybe these aren't there aren't specifics in the plans yet, but for like the outdoor time you mentioned and how it has mental health benefits, I feel like probably the high school students are the ones like most affected by mental health crises, I guess, and would most benefit from this. But also, like, I would say most people don't take AP Environmental Science, and like just off the top of my head, I can only think of 2 classes at my school that really emphasize like outdoor time, which is AP Environmental Science, and then like Outdoor Adventures, which is a fitness class. And on top of that, like I go to Eastlake, which we have like a whole swamp and an entire ecosystem like out back, but I can imagine a lot of schools also don't have that. So I'm just wondering, like, since we do know that like outdoor time has research benefits, but we also know that at the high school level we don't have like things like recess where there's like a coordinated time for everyone to go outside. We don't have like all schools don't have natural habitats, and then not all students or most students won't end up taking these classes. How are we going to integrate that?
So that is a really great question, and it is not answered in the plan. I'll just be totally upfront. So that's a great example of the kind of question that so particularly in the learning and the equipping students section, it's about starting, moving in a direction, and there are a million things that are not answered of how to do that in the plan, and there are a million ways, partially because the right answer, as you say, is going to depend on the building, the grounds, the teachers, the students, the classes. And what I like about this strategic commitment to integrated sustainability that this district has made is that there's a framework for how you engage the question and how you look for the answer. Because in my experience in education, when there's something that's super prescribed, you often end up with something that has the form of compliance and not the reality of the experience. And also because I think you're going to want to figure that out at different levels. So that might be a question that students and teachers engage together in the high school. And so it sounds like I'm saying, no, there's no answer. But I actually think the truth of it is that it's a little bit deeper than that, which is that this is a starting point. And these are the questions that you're now going to engage as a community. And it's a really good point, actually. Like the mental health benefits are great for everybody, would be even more relevant for high school students. So how do you actually start to get that into the practices of the high school? Not prescribed in the plan. True.
Director Liberty?
I've been noodling on my question earlier and your responses. So if we're going to be adopting a roadmap that will outline clear priorities and phase steps to guide implementation over time, I do think that OE9, the monitoring of that, needs to be more than just, I think it needs to explicitly, I think we need to explicitly monitor whether we are meeting. If we're going to go through and the district's going to say we are adopting this roadmap, these are the milestones, these are the priorities. I think from a governance perspective, the board, if we're saying, and these are fitting within our the values that we have in policy, I do think the monitoring has to explicitly look at that and have that report that the indicators of compliance and how the district reports out whether it's compliant with the board's policies. I think it does need to be tied pretty neatly to that roadmap. And right now, that's how I feel. I want to have more conversation. Like I, for all the reasons as we've gone through this, I want to be very thoughtful and careful as we go about it. Sitting here today, thinking about it for the last 30 minutes, that's where I'm at right now. Okay.
I had a question too. Thanks to Director Liberty. Last weekend, we were looking at the long-term facilities roadmap for our district, which I think went out well into like the 2070s. So we have schools that are very operational today that are not scheduled where the end of life is past this 2050 sort of net neutral deadline, can we get a school up to contributing towards that goal, I guess? I'm sure there's some things that are very convenient to do when you're just completely remodeling or rebuilding a school, which is what we're often doing. But are there things that we can and should be thinking about for those schools, especially the ones that are further out, in terms of how we might reach that goal, even if we're not sort of scheduled for any really large scale construction for quite a while?
Yeah, I think there are major component systems within all of our schools that will need replacement. Karen mentioned the deferred maintenance plan. It's really looking at the life cycle of those assets and determining when you would upgrade them into something that is electric and not fossil fuel.
Brian, isn't that what the Green Buildings Act requires?
Yeah, the Green Buildings Act really is the way to get there is the electrification of your heating systems, along with any EUI reductions such as LED lighting, CO2 sensors, converting from gas to electric. Those are all part of the strategies to comply with with that.
Director Meekhoff.
I have a couple of just specific questions that I'm thinking on. One is, obviously the impact would be a lot less, but I think in terms of modeling our practices, I'm wondering what people's thoughts are, or if there is discussion already around having composting here, like in district offices. So that's one. And then two, James, you had mentioned in terms of people not knowing the recycling and compost. As someone who's in an elementary school once a week for lunch, I see so much food waste. And I'm wondering if anyone knows. I know that there's a rule that if you get school lunch, you have to take. And I see so much of that go either in the trash or in the compost without ever being consumed. And so that's just something that's on my mind.
So there's others that could answer the details of your latter question. Your first question is, how are we modeling that at all facilities in the school district? One of your board colleagues emailed me a couple weeks ago and asked a few questions about our process here in this room for board meetings. And so Matt and I were just actually discussing that right before this meeting. So I completely agree. Like, we need to be modeling and implementing the same types of procedures and expectations that create a consistent application of our practices in all environments across the district.
And then regarding your other question about like how you're seeing at schools that kids might not know what goes in what, that is part of I can't remember what point it is, but essentially integrating sustainability into everyday learning is a really big focus for our students, making sure that whether that's waste or recycling or turning off water, anything like that, that is something that is really just common sense and just integrated into every day for them is something that we are really focusing on in here.
Yeah, your other note was related to just how we get funded for nutrition services, and it does require, and I believe it's federal, does require that all students get certain servings of certain food groups.
James.
So I know we covered the cost, but I think, like, in my head, what keeps happening is at any level of like government or organization, when they're committing to being net zero, because obviously you want to lower your carbon emissions, what happens is they don't have enough money. And what I'm wondering is, especially for us when we're continuing to cut costs, where are we getting this money? Where are other school districts getting this money? And are we looking to to work with the 294 other school districts in the state or with OSPI to see like, okay, if we're gonna try this experimental aspect in our schools, then we share the results with other school districts so they can learn from us, or try and make an impact in another way that doesn't necessarily have to be spending like 10 million on new buses or something like that.
You know, one of the ways we share practices with other school districts, we have state level conferences where both WASDA, you've attended that, but we also have I'll just call it an administrative state conference in June every year. And as we do work and find promising practices, that's one of the ways we get information out. Yes, people come and attend, but all of those presentations are then available to, you know, other attendees, other districts and things like that. And so, yes, probably people would come who have a unique interest in it, but it also starts to get information out just so that people can access those resources. So I would just say that's one of the ways that districts share practices across the state.
And then, sorry, in terms of funding, I think I like muddled my one question into two questions. In terms of funding, are we like, are we going to allocate a certain amount of funding to like these new like EV buses? Is it, like how is that?
So we're already allocating resources to resource conservation and sustainability. And so it isn't that, are we going to start allocating? It's how do we continue to allocate resources, number one. Number two, through the evaluations of, let's just take our non-school bus vehicles. That's a much smaller profile, way less expensive than a bus fleet. Well, we can actually do something pretty meaningfully because we already have funds to turn those vehicles over. We could start making a transition to, you know, fully electric or hybrid, depending on the needs of the specific use. And so we already have funds dedicated, which were historically used for purchasing, you know, gas vehicles. Well, we can do something different. Because the price difference isn't that dramatic any longer. And there's some other ways to accomplish that through leases and things like that if we want to think about it. So and we may say at some point in time, you know, we want to make a commitment to, you know, X thing. Well, we may need to go to the community and say, you know, we would need a partnership to be able to do that through levy funds and things like that, transportation vehicle levy, things like that. And so, and there are others that need to help us with this effort. Legislative advocacy, both at the state and the federal level, working with our municipal partners. I think there's opportunity to partner because a community can't fund all things. And so we have a responsibility to find ways to maybe use dollars more thoughtfully. And maybe if our cities are doing something that we can partner with them on, if we can come alongside, we have to be creative to be able to do this because it isn't all about new dollars to accomplish, because this plan is, you know, if we were just to put a dollar amount, it's, you know, millions and millions, if not more than that.
Suniri.
This is kind of going back to Director Minkoff's question. Just to clarify, you said that we're federally required to serve them certain portions. So I'm wondering, like, would it be possible to not serve these things that, like, we often see wasted in, like, sealed containers? So we still provide them the option to have it or, like, serve it to them, but if the food is still sealed, it can be put back or, you know, donated, I guess. So we can still reduce food waste that way while, like, meeting legal obligations.
Yeah, so part of the shared table idea is just that is to share things that haven't been opened that can be shared with students that don't have lunch can use. There's often food-borne illness issues, so once something comes out of a kitchen and is served, it can't come back in. So even if you had to give fruit as a serving and they say, thanks for the fruit, I want to give the fruit back, they can't actually take it back. So there are some challenges with the current way that food services and nutrition services is funded.
Also, just jump in there without. I think that's actually a really good example of where we have multiple things that we might be trying to achieve, right? So if we were to package more food, so it could be passed around or reused, but then we're actually increasing our packaging, which would be in that scope 3, and so. We're often, I think, in navigating this, and as we kind of keep going, recognizing that a lot of our decisions are, you lean in one way and it's okay, well, we're going to cost a little bit more. That might actually increase our emissions, or like there's all these trade-offs with all of these different choices. And sometimes, like with respect to federal food service roles, there's some pretty clear guidelines that we have to follow. The other thing is thinking about, I know I've talked with Ralph, who's in charge of our food, and also looking about how we're actually trying to increase locally grown food, right? And so that comes, comes in differently. So all of these different variables are at play, and we're making choices to try to get the best possible outcome, and recognizing that every choice we make might actually increase some waste, or whether that's packaging or food, and so it's a great question because there's not an easy answer.
I think a person could write a book about one apple being served and what it can and can't do for all of the regulations. It's the reason we started to laugh at the end of your question before Brian started is that it's maddening. When you start getting into it and understanding what makes it so hard. The student doesn't want the apple, they don't take the apple. They took the apple, they changed their mind, they can share it. Sort of very common sense ways that we interact or don't with food in the entire rest of the world become impossible in the school lunchroom. And there are just, this is one of those examples of endless levels of regulation, all of which, have reasons like food safety, or you don't want a school district to get reimbursed for an apple, take it right back and send it back out, never having actually offered the apple to its child. That's fraud usually. So, so when you start digging in, it's actually really interesting. These individually reasonable things add up to an insane system, and I think that characterizes so many aspects of our lives right now, with healthcare, with it just kind of happens all over the place. And taking on one of those issues and kind of going after it and saying, I'm going to actually advocate at the federal level, I'm going to advocate at the state level. This is actually something that a group of young people can do and be really, really effective at. So I want to just encourage you not to give up on that, and also to look at all the different levels that need action. So there is work on the federal farm bill, which includes the school food program, to make changes to it. It's currently, nothing's happening, but that means that there's room to actually try to get draft language in for the eventual time when this bill does happen, and same thing at the state level. And so it's worth people kind of identifying the issue that they find fascinating and can't let go of. And if you wake up late at night thinking about that school lunch apple and how it's just maddening that it can't go to the person who needs an apple, then take that on and see what you can do with it, because it really is amazing when you dig into all of the regulations.
Last question, Director Richter.
It is the last one, and I'm going to blame Eric because he brought up indicators twice, so now I have to respond. But I hear what you're saying. If there's a roadmap with, hey, there's quantifiable things in there, let's use that and key off of that. But I also heard what Karen was saying about things that make our district unique. It's partly our achievements, and that's a lot of that tied to the fact we're resourced enough here to be able to do a lot of things maybe others can't, but also the values. and the drive. So some way of balancing that, and of balancing the fact that if resources get cut from federal, state, whatever level, a lack of meeting a particular goal may not be, you know, I hate saying the fault of, but the fault of the district, but originates somewhere else. So there, that's my one thing I said to you and to John and to the rest of you. Okay.
All right, thank you so much for coming, for walking through this. Yes, this is something I know we've felt as a board is really important to our community. So really, it's been exciting to see the work and to get to the point where we do have this plan, because this has been wanted for a long time. So thank you for coming, thank you for presenting, thank you for walking through all our questions. And since there are no other agenda items, the March 23rd, 2026 study session is now adjourned at 6:46 p.m.